Greetings and salutations everyone, my name is Kirk and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're talking about my Week 17 waiver wire targets for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're going to be talking about waiver wire pickups at the running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, and defensive positions going into Week 17. We'll talk about players that are not only coming off of great performances, but could potentially start for you this upcoming week. Now, I want to go ahead and first and foremost talk about Week 17. Again, I've said it multiple times during the offseason, during the regular season, playing in a Week 17 championship in the current format is never a good idea because as we get to the end of the regular season, many teams who have already clinched NFL playoff spots are probably not going to start their main key players. For example, the Kansas City Chiefs have already locked in the number one seed on the AFC. They are given the bye, and they are the only team that will have a bye week on the AFC side of the ball. Now, the question is, are they going to start their key starters? Andy Reid has already come out and said that guys like Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce should not be expected to play. They are probably not going to play. And if you are playing in a Week 17 championship and you are relying on the value of those guys putting up 20 points a week plus each, you're not going to be able to get those kind of players, which is unfortunate. So this is what I suggest in the future, whether you're a commissioner, a player in the league, or just join random leagues, make sure that you're playing in a league that does not play in the final week of the regular season. Now, I know in the future we're going to have 18 regular season weeks. Of course, it's been agreed upon by the NFLPA. We're going to have, I think, 17 regular season games going in the forward. Obviously, it'll be because they're removing preseason games as we continue. But to be honest, you got to make sure that you're not playing in the final week so you can avoid instances like this. Players that are like Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes that are needing to be in your roster this week are not going to be there. And there could be other players that are held out because of injury or because the game isn't really worth anything because they're not bidding for a playoff spot. So again, you got to be careful about playing in the final week of the NFL regular season. That's the last time. I mean, I'll probably mention it every single episode this week, but I wanted to go ahead and first and foremost explain to you the thought process as to why you shouldn't play in a Week 17 championship. But that being said, I'm here to help. Hopefully this will be the last time that you have to go ahead and participate in one of those 2-week championships or in a final game as such for this week. But we're going to do everything like we normally do throughout the week. During this weekend's games, of course, we'll have live streams on Saturday and Sunday. We'll make sure that everything goes according to plan. We'll have running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback rankings all for you guys throughout the week. So make sure you guys tune in. And if you have not yet already, subscribe to the channel. We're making fantasy football content all through the 2020 season. Going into 2021, of course, we'll be talking about the NFL playoffs, all that kind of stuff, get you guys more content information regarding that. Otherwise, make sure you click the like button down below. Comment down below what you guys think about Week 17. Obviously, for those of you who are playing in it, hopefully you'll be done with it after this season. All right, so I wanted to go ahead and begin with the running back position for Week 17 because there are some players here that could end up being as viable options. Now, majority of the players that I'm going to mention on today's video do not, really get much playing time and really have just come out as of late based on injuries and or the circumstance as to their team and the matchups for this upcoming week. Now, these players are majority owned less than 60% of leagues. That's what I try to typically do on a weekly basis, mention players that are widely owned on Yahoo formats. So that's what we'll go ahead and cover. Beginning off with our number one running back, I'm going to put A.J. Dillon as our number one this week under this circumstance. Jamal Williams, the backup running back to Aaron Jones, has been dealing with an injury. He did not play this past week, obviously last night on Sunday Night Football against the Tennessee Titans. That team absolutely dominated the Tennessee Titans. A.J. Dillon was a big part of that. Over 100 rushing yards, scored a touchdown. I mean, was absolutely electric, 20-plus touches on the ground. Now, the last time the Green Bay Packers took on the Chicago Bears, we had a pretty similar fashion as last night's game. It was a blowout, and of course, we did see Mitch Trubisky, kind of ride his team back into that game. But with that being said, if this is once again a blowout, we are going to see some touches from the second-string running back. The last time that they played against the Chicago Bears earlier this season, Jamal Williams had himself, 17 carries for 73 yards and a rushing touchdown. I think if, in fact, Jamal Williams is going to be out, A.J. Dillon could be in line for some good amount of touches for this week. Obviously, proven himself as a viable option after last night's game. He's the number one for this week. Number two is Gus Edwards. Of course, we talked about Gus Edwards all season long. He is the number two running back behind J.K. Dobbins. Now, of course, it's a matter of what this matchup brings to the team. They're playing against the Cincinnati Bengals, and as it currently stands, I do really think that the Ravens are going to blow right through them. It should be a very easy contest. I know the Cincinnati Bengals are coming off of back-to-back victories against Pittsburgh Steelers and the Houston Texans, but with that being said, this should be a one-sided affair where Lamar Jackson, J.K. Dobbins, they get their work done in the first half, and Gus Edwards will get majority of the carries in the second half. And with that being said, just look at the performance that David Johnson had on the ground yesterday. Over 100 rushing yards, had one of the best games of his entire season. Actually, it was the best fantasy performance of his entire season. So again, regardless, I think running backs against that Cincinnati defense should be a great play. Gus Edwards is another one of them. We have Malcolm Brown as our number 3, with Cam Akers dealing with the injury and Darrell Henderson going down with an ankle injury yesterday on that tackle that, of course, Jamal Williams, ran him down and tackled him. Obviously, ultimately stopping the Rams on that drive. As a Rams fan, I'm dejected. I don't even know. They might not even make the playoffs at this point. It might as well not, because we're going to get smacked in the first round. Anyway, that being said, Malcolm Brown could be a viable option this week. With Jared Goff dealing with a thumb injury, Cam Akers not 100% clear to return this week. I'm not sure exactly how that kind of stands. If, in fact, we do see Malcolm Brown be the starter, I think he's not a bad play. I think he could be picked up and played against Arizona and could have himself a potential of getting a pretty good amount of touches, getting the goal line work, and in that, getting himself some fantasy value like he has already done this season before, and he's proven to be, a pretty relevant back. So he's our number 3. Number 4 is La'Mical Perine. So there is an injury to Frank Gore. Now, you may be thinking, okay, Andrew, doesn't Ty Johnson, jump in as the number 2 back there? As of the last couple of weeks, since the return of La'Mical Perine, he has been the guy for Adam Gase. Now, Kensington Cat, one of our Discord users and Patreon supporters, I was talking to him earlier, and he was saying that the Jets have risen like the phoenix from its ashes, right? It's unbelievable what the Jets have done in the last 2 weeks, beating 2 potential playoff teams, a team with 9 wins and a team with 10 wins. So again, the Jets have looked great. They play against New England Patriots in Week 17. That Patriots defense has not stopped the run. For those of you who are looking for some productivity out of Zach Moss, Devin Singletary tonight, you'll probably see that. And I think the Jets, the way that they've been playing, they could also have themselves a pretty productive week against the New England Patriots in Week 17. So La'Mical Perine, not a bad option at all, getting majority of the touches out of that backfield. We have Darrel Williams as our number 5. Now, I mentioned this before. The Kansas City Chiefs starters will not be playing this upcoming week. But I do not think that includes Darrel Williams. Okay, so here's the thing. Le'Veon Bell didn't get very many touches. Darrel Williams pretty much dominated the touches on Sunday's game. With Clyde Edwards-Helaire probably out again this week, it kind of leans to Darrel Williams getting majority of the touches. They do play against the Los Angeles Chargers. It will be a second-string offense, probably with a first-string offensive line. But I do think that if, in fact, you are in a really, tough situation and you're in a bind and you need someone to have to throw in there and get some productivity at the running back position, I don't think that Darrel Williams is a bad option. I think obviously last week, I guess with the starting offense of Mahomes and Kelsey and Tyreek Hill surrounding him, he found more productivity because, there wasn't as much of an impact on stop the run. With the backup quarterback this week, it might be more of a focus for the Los Angeles Chargers defense and more, may force Darrel Williams to have a little bit of a tougher game. But overall, I still think that he is not a bad option as a running back. Again, we are really thin at the running back position, so we got to name just about anybody who's available. The last option I wanted to mention on today's episode is Darrel Ogumbowale, the running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He was formerly of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, obviously signed with this team. Didn't really get much work all season long with the productivity and incredible play of James Robinson all season. James Robinson is dealing with a knee injury for the last couple of weeks and was out this last week. Probably will once again miss, as they're trying not to go ahead and force a young rookie player like himself to have to force and play in a game that is really honestly an irrelevant game. You want to get the first overall pick. They'll do that with just losing this upcoming week against the Indianapolis Colts. So Darrel Ogumbowale, not a bad option, but I think the fact that he has the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield, get himself an ample amount of touches, he himself, be a decent option this week. Okay, we move on to the wide receiver position. For now, I'm thinking to myself, who is the most valuable wide receiver in all of the land? It honestly has to be Michael Gallup at this point. Now, even though Amari Cooper, had himself 14.1 fantasy points and a half PPR with 121 receiving yards. CeeDee Lamb had an incredible game with a touchdown, but Michael Gallup outdid them all, had over 100 receiving yards, had himself a receiving touchdown, had himself a boatload of targets, and all of that continues to just go in his direction, even with the injury forcing him to leave the game the week prior. In Week 15, Michael Gallup returned, had an incredible game against that Philadelphia Eagles secondary. Has been struggling all season long. Michael Gallup, a great performance, has had better performances as of the last couple weeks. I am so excited about the potential of this offense when Dak returns next year. But regardless, Andy Dalton playing against the New York Giants defense, I think that Michael Gallup's not a bad option at all this week as our number one receiving option. We have Curtis Samuel, once again, another player that we've mentioned multiple times. He's owned in, I think, about 61% of leagues as it currently stands. So, again, if Curtis Samuel's available, I don't mind the option against the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints are probably going to beat the Carolina Panthers by a pretty number. It'll force Teddy Bridgewater to throw the entire time. With that being said, this is a little bit of a, that revenge game, quote unquote, for Teddy Bridgewater. He'll get himself a pretty good ample amount of touches and throw the ball for the entire game. Curtis Samuel, coming off of a game in which he had over 100 receiving yards, a couple touches on the ground, obviously gets himself, a couple carries here and there, has himself some upside and some floor of productivity that I think is a valuable set against the New Orleans Saints secondary. We have Zach Pascal of the Indianapolis Colts. Now, Zach Pascal hasn't really been relevant until the last couple weeks. I mean, really, in the last couple weeks, he is scoring touchdowns, and he's become the favorite target of Phillip Rivers. And Phillip Rivers has done this just as of late. T.Y. Hilton, back-to-back weeks, scores a touchdown. As of the last 2 weeks, Zach Pascal scored touchdowns. He can once again do it against the Jacksonville Jaguars defense that has been struggling all season long. We like to see that Zach Pascal is playing majority of the offensive snaps. He is on the field majority of the time because, again, he is one of those blocking wide receivers that you always want on the field that helps Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines out a lot and helps the offensive line. So, again, Zach Pascal always on the field, getting himself a lot of looks from the direction of Phillip Rivers. Not a bad option going into Week 17 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. We have Jakobi Meyers. Again, Jakobi Meyers is the number one wide receiver of this team. Now, even though he hasn't had the greatest productivity late in this season in comparison to what he had earlier, he has still found some games here and there in which he's had over 100 receiving yards. Now, he has not played in tonight's game. I don't know the result of the Bills and New England Patriots game, but with that being said, I still have some confidence with him against the New York Jets secondary. I think even though the Jets have played better in the last couple weeks, there is still a possibility that their secondary can get torched. Now, obviously, Baker Mayfield wasn't able to do so because his entire wide receiver core was out this past week, but I really do think that there is a very good chance and a probable likelihood that Jakobi Meyers, Cam Newton could connect and find themselves some relevant fantasy productivity there. We have Sterling Shepard as our number 5. So, Daniel Jones is a tricky situation, and I think Sterling Shepard having himself a pretty good game this past week could be considered a bit of a fluke, considering they are really not getting a lot of productivity at the wide receiver position via the Giants, and the Giants as a whole really haven't found any stride this season in terms of consistency all year long. So even though Sterling Shepard is coming off of a great week in which he had, I think it was 70 receiving yards, a receiving touchdown. That's all great. A fine amount of targets against the Baltimore secondary that has been great all season long. The question remains, what can we anticipate from him this week against the Dallas Cowboys? I don't think this is a tough matchup. I think this is, in fact, one of the easier matchups and something that we could take advantage of if, in fact, you are in need of a wide receiver and the depth isn't looking good for your team. We have Laviska Shenault as our last option. So the way I see Laviska Shenault with Mike Glennon at quarterback, he is connected with Laviska Shenault for a touchdown multiple times in the last couple weeks when he has been the starter. Now, of course, you're playing against the Indianapolis Colts. That secondary has been great all season long. But even going back to week 1, Shenault scored a touchdown against them, has found success in the last couple of weeks, and will continue to find success as one of those targets that is, closer to the line of scrimmage. Without having James Robinson out of the backfield, there isn't much of an option to check down there. You might be looking for Shenault, and honestly, as a guy that is probably available in many leagues, could be a decent option. Again, there are so many options in that Jacksonville offense with potential of Shenault scoring, Keelan Cole scoring, Chark finally scored this past week, even Chris Conley. There are so many receivers in an offense that, of course, it could be anybody on a given week, but I think Shenault has a pretty good option this week. Moving on to our tight ends for Week 17, beginning off with our number 1, Irv Smith, coming off of a game in which he had 2 receiving touchdowns against the New Orleans Saints. I think that their matchup this week I think it bodes well for them. The fact that Kirk Cousins is still playing well and finding consistency, even in games in which, of course, he has struggled here and there, kind of leans in the direction of maybe you want to go ahead and fire up in Irv Smith. I mean, there's a reason why Dalvin Cook didn't get much playing time last week because the game was over. And if, in fact, they're going to have to do that once again this week, throw for majority of that contest, then why not fire him up against the Detroit Lions, who, again, gave up 2 touchdowns to Rob Gronkowski this past week? Why not to Irv Smith? I think there's a very good likelihood of that occurring. Irv Smith, not a bad option. We move on to our number 2, Jonnu Smith. Okay, so here's the thing about Jonnu Smith. Scoring a touchdown last night, beautiful. Obviously, that team kind of quit in the second half, and they got benched, and everything happened, whatever. Going into this week's matchup against the Houston Texans, Houston is going to get torched. They did give up a touchdown to Drew Sample, the tight end of the Cincinnati Bengals, and I think there is a very good chance that Houston's defense, who has been awful all season long, is probably going to be bad once again this week. So if in fact you are trying to take advantage of a, I guess, favorable matchup, I think Houston's is a pretty good one, firing up Jonnu Smith in that offense. We have Austin Hooper, again, probably available in 60% of leagues. He's a guy that should have been picked up last week and potentially started against the Jets, got himself 11.6 fantasy points. I'll take that any given week. So the question is, in a half PPR, can we trust him again this week going against the Pittsburgh Steelers? I think it's less of a likelihood that we can 100% trust him. But with that being said, if he's going to continue to be a big part of this offense, we cannot ignore his potential value and we'll have to buy in on it. I don't think Austin Hooper's a bad idea at all this week. We have Jared Cook, of course, playing against the Carolina Panthers. Carolina, they themselves have been, struggling against tight ends. Even with the last couple of weeks, Carolina giving up touchdowns to just about anybody. I mean, Noah Fant scoring a touchdown. This last week, Logan Thomas, he did get over 10 targets. Obviously, wasn't able to produce a big enough week in comparison to weeks prior, but in a full PPR, still got himself 15 points. I think Jared Cook in this offense, like he proved last week, can be a very vital part, can make big plays, and especially is a red zone threat if, in fact, they're not going to run for 7 touchdowns in a singular game. So, again, Jared Cook could be a value this week as our number 4. We have Dan Arnold as our number 5 playing against the Rams. Now, the last time he played against the Rams, if I'm not mistaken, he had 2 touchdowns and had himself a pretty good game. I think the Rams just giving up a touchdown at Jacob Hollister and just their struggles as of late kind of leads me towards Dan Arnold. I'm just looking for a tight end that isn't owned in very many leagues that we can rely upon. Obviously, you can go to a Jimmy Graham or a Cole Kmet, but the coin toss of that is scary to an extent. The last tight end I wanted to mention before we move on to the quarterback position is Tyler Higbee on the other side of the ball playing against the Arizona Cardinals. If Jared Goff is a full go, then I'll go ahead and I'll rely upon Tyler Higbee and I'll say he's played pretty well against Arizona in his career as of the last 2 seasons, and I'll continue to buy in on the idea that he could once again produce against them in Week 17 of the 2020 fantasy football season. We move on to quarterbacks, and we begin with our number 1, Kirk Cousins. Again, like I mentioned before, he plays against the Detroit Lions. There's a reason why I'm so high on Irv Smith as of this week, because just look at what Tom Brady did. Tom Brady scored 4 touchdowns and had over 350 passing yards at halftime. Blaine Gabbert came in the second half, had a perfect passer rating, 2 passing touchdowns, and they annihilated that defense. If Matthew Stafford's out, that offense will not function, their defense will not function, and Kirk Cousins can very easily produce this week as a top-tier quarterback play. We have Mitch Trubisky, Maserati Mitch. I mean, my goodness, has he been incredible. There's a very good chance that they can even make the playoffs. After where they started 5-1, then completely just fell off the rails and went from 5-1 to like 5-7, and then now we're at 8-7. My goodness, Mitch Trubisky has brought them back. And to be honest, if in fact he's going to produce, it's going to be via garbage time. The last time he played against the Green Bay Packers, he found himself a lot of productivity in said garbage time with Allen Robinson, with David Montgomery in the passing game. They very easily could do it again this week. Maybe if in fact this is more of a competitive game back and forth between these 2 division rivals, we'll see even more productivity out of Mitch Trubisky. But either way, he'll always have the stability of garbage time, and he has been playing better in comparison to potentially his entire career. Even when we go back to 2018, in that season where he had 24 passing touchdowns, had himself over 450 rushing yards, he had a great season there as a starting quarterback in his second season. But he's, in my opinion, playing better right now. Obviously, the matchups are in his favor, but he has obviously proven that he is a valuable fantasy quarterback. He won me a championship this past week in one of my leagues. So again, Mitch Trubisky, a fantastic play going into Week 17. Moving on to our number 3, we have Andy Dalton. And here's the thing. As of the last 2 weeks, he's been pretty good. I mean, playing against the 49ers defense, they obviously were able to lock down Kyler Murray, but Andy Dalton was able to score 2 passing touchdowns while he led that offense to score for over 40 points. He also had himself another great game this past week. While down 14-3, they came back and they won, 37-17 or something like that against the Eagles. They just rallied behind Andy Dalton. This offense was able to produce. Zeke was getting running on the ground. The defense has been playing better. And to be honest, as a whole, this offense, this defense, this Cowboys team has looked better. I think playing against the Giants this week should be a favorable matchup for Andy Dalton. Moving on to our number 4, we have Derek Carr, quarterback of the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, even though he's coming off a lot of weeks of actual high productivity, it's a matter of what are we anticipating from this team in Week 17. They're not fighting for a playoff spot. They're pretty much eliminated after that game against the Miami Dolphins, of course, throwing the lead late in that contest. The question is, what do we anticipate? I honestly think that based on what we saw the last time the Denver Broncos took on the Las Vegas Raiders, I mean, the Raiders ran all over that defense. Both running backs had over 80 rushing yards on the Raiders and a touchdown. So again, there's a very good chance that they're going to run all over them. But I honestly think this will be a tougher time in terms of running the ball against Denver. And I think Derek Carr will certainly have to pass the ball. As long as he has Nelson Aguilar and Darren Waller in front of him, he will produce. And I think he's not a bad option as a number 4 this week. The number 5 pickup is Phillip Rivers playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, the first game of the season, he was still trying to find his, I guess, rhythm in this offense, trying to find a little bit of a connection with his receivers, and it wasn't really there. He was able to throw the ball to his running backs, Nyheim Hines, Marlon Mack prior to the injury, and Jonathan Taylor in the week 1 contest against Jacksonville. But I think Phillip Rivers will have a far better experience this week against Jacksonville. That defense has been awful all season long, and they will continue to be. I think Phillip Rivers will get back on track, start throwing, those 2+ passing touchdown games once again, and have himself a pretty good week here. The last quarterback option I wanted to mention is Baker Mayfield. If, in fact, Baker Mayfield can produce and compete against the Pittsburgh Steelers, I wouldn't be surprised. There's a chance that this Cleveland Browns team could even miss the playoffs if they lose this week as a 10-win team. That's insane for me to even just try to comprehend. But either way, that is the reality of the situation. As it currently stands, Baker Mayfield, of course, a valuable option at the quarterback position if, in fact, his receivers are there, because he has produced very well as of the last couple of weeks. He struggled this week. We all anticipated it based on Jarvis Landry, Higgins being out. But again, hopefully, if they're back, he should be able to have himself a bounce back week here in week 17. Moving on to the last part of this video, we're talking about defenses. Starting off with our number 1, we have the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals defense has played better over the last 3 weeks, and they take on an offense in the Los Angeles Rams that is completely just awful. I will tell you, as a Rams fan and someone that watches every single one of their games, Sunday's game was probably the worst game I've ever seen by them. So it's a matter of what exactly are we going to anticipate. Jared Goff has a messed up thumb in his throwing hand. On top of it, we have ourselves, Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson both hurt. The defense has not looked up to the elite level that they did earlier this season. So again, Arizona Cardinals could be a pretty good option there. We have the Indianapolis Colts, probably already owned in your league, but if you have them, play them against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I really do think that is a good play this upcoming week. We have the Buffalo Bills. Again, you probably have them owned in your league against the New England Patriots for Monday Night Football's game. Hopefully they play well against them tonight to capture your championship. But in the following week, I don't see them as a bad option at all. Honestly, them against the Miami Dolphins, the way that Tua has looked at in the last couple games, just doesn't really look like a quarterback that you can go ahead and play against the Buffalo Bills and find productivity. The Dallas Cowboys, again, like I've mentioned, have been better and better as of the last couple weeks in terms of forcing turnovers and getting their defense onto the same page or the same level at which their offense was, which wasn't the case earlier this season. They've been playing better. We have the Washington football team this upcoming week. I think Washington's in a very tricky situation, but nonetheless, they are a good defense. I know that they weren't able to produce. They've obviously cut Dwayne Haskins, and hopefully their defense will be able to, bottle up opposing offenses. I know they did bottle up Teddy Bridgewater, even though they took a 20-point lead early in that game. It just seemed to me like Washington was able to at least hold them to a point and continue to just put on pressure. And the last defense I wanted to mention is the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks, as of right now, again, they're one of the better defenses in terms of just stopping opposing offenses as of the last couple of weeks. Even though offensively they haven't been able to play up to par to a lot of opposing offenses, it just seems to me like their defense is carrying their team, and I think they'll once again do that here in Week 17. All right, those are my waiver wire targets for Week 17 of the 2020 fantasy football season. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Make sure you click the like button down below. Really do appreciate that. Thank you for supporting the channel. Tomorrow we'll be talking about my top 36 running back rankings. Good luck tonight for those of you who are in a Week 16 championship and you're looking for some big performances out of Josh Allen, Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley. The Bills defense, Tyler Bass, whoever it ends up being on that Bills, even if it's on the Patriots, whether it's a Sony Michel or a Jakobi Meyers. Good luck, and until tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.